A missing piece of the puzzle. When observing the old world structures today, there is a great sense of absence and alteration. Structures have evidently been altered and changed drastically over the last 200 or so years. And when journeying across our realm and studying these structures, a tremendous sense of absence persists. Something is missing. The concept of ethereal harvesting through these wondrous antennas is not enough. It is not concrete enough to complete the picture. Something else was once present that made the entire technological grid possible. This, of course, is the key technological component of these structures, the engine, and the central mechanisms that made them function in the first place. The engines were, of course, not tokamaks. A tokamak is a crude and base instrument. It is a design of the new world. It does not belong in the old world. It would have had no place in their structures. Their sophistication and finesse would not have relied on such ugliness, on such primitiveness. What is undeniable, however, are the parallels between the tokamak's fundamental octagonal form and the old world's love for the octagon. It is very likely that the octagonal formation is an essential component when generating a toroidal vortex. We see the octagon everywhere in the old world. Octagonal geometry underpins many of the structure's fundamental formations. And the peculiar octagonal structures everywhere are not by mistake. They are what they seem. Empty shells that once housed something else. This sense of emptiness is everywhere and remains unexplained. So many towers and domes rise to smaller, hollow domed cupolas. Why are they hollow? Why would an earlier civilization waste so much time and energy constructing such a seemingly superfluous and useless structure? But they didn't, did they? A lot of these empty areas are always directly below the antennas. And although not all of these crucial empty structures are octagonal, most are, and they are always situated in key areas, like under central antennas, beneath domed resonators, in the center of closed, symmetrical courtyards, or detached and just outside the bigger generators. And when reflecting on such perfectly wrought geometry, the absence is tangible. There used to be some kind of cylinder or apparatus contained within this space. Furthermore, we also find various historical relics that closely resemble the old world structural style. In these relics we see that empty cylinders or vessels are an integral part of the object. Could these be miniature functional objects that mirror the form of the larger empty spaces we see in the old world structures? Perhaps a kind of micro household object that enabled access to the wider power grid's energy production? Did the larger structures themselves contain similar cylinders within? In many old photographs, the cupolas and octagonal spaces are already emptied. but there do remain a few images and illustrations that can offer a little insight as to what was present before. In some we see a type of cylinder, and in others we see some kind of orb or container. Due to the lack of images, it is hard to present a consistent finding. And so much has been altered, and in ways that are almost impossible to recognize. For instance, this is an 1880 illustration of the so-called completion of Cologne Cathedral. It focuses on the top of one of these spires. The wooden boards here are scaffolding. As you can see, the tops of these spires open, revealing some kind of cylinder. This is a model of the area of the spire that we see in the illustration. It was put outside of the cathedral to give tourists an idea as to just how large these spires are. An impossibility for citizens of the 19th century. The men in this illustration are not completing the final spire of the cathedral. They are removing whatever existed in the container at its apex. And it begs the question as to how many other aspects and features of these structures open in similar ways. And why do they open? What did they contain? Interestingly, it is the esoteric and occult that provide some clues. Alchemy was an arcane natural philosophy or proto-scientific tradition. Its central focus was chrysopia, or the transmutation of base metals into noble metals. From its inception in ancient Egyptian, Greek, Indian, and Middle Eastern culture, the field of alchemy, we are told, was obsessed with turning base metals into gold, and a maniacal obsession with creating the elixir of life to achieve immortality. We have all heard of the medieval Nicholas Flamel and the Philosopher's Stone. It is a field of inquiry steeped in a rich fabric of occultism, Kabbalah mysticism, and magic. It wasn't until the mid-18th century that alchemy was divorced from its occultism and transformed into the burgeoning field of chemistry. But there was a small occult revival during the 19th century that continued into the 20th century. In 1922, a mysterious text was written by an equally mysterious figure. The Mystery of the Cathedrals by Fulcanelli, a French alchemist, we are told. To this day, the identity of Fulcanelli is still debated. No one knows who he truly was. And like many mysterious figures in the history books, his name appears to be an anagrammatic play on words. Fulcan is a reference to Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, and Eli, a reference to El, the Canaanite word for God. It is evidently a work of one or more Freemasons, but nonetheless, its alchemical reading of the wondrous and magnificent structures we call cathedrals is potently original and offers many insights and half-truths. And it's in Fulcanelli's reading of the statue of Orpheus that was taken from Notre Dame Cathedral and destroyed that he begins to offer the reader some truths. As the legend goes, Orpheus was a strong giant, but with a dull mind. His intentions were always good, He wanted to serve the most powerful king on earth. He was sent to the court of a mighty king to serve him. One day, the king, hearing a singer say the devil's name, made a sign of the cross with terror. "Why do you make that sign?" Offerus asked. "Because I fear the devil," the king replied. "If you fear him, you are not as powerful as him," Offerus reasoned. "I want to serve the devil." And so he did, and enrolled among Satan's servants. One day, the servants met a cross by the side of the road, and the devil ordered them to turn around. "Why is that?" the curious Offerus asked. "Because I fear the image of Christ," the devil replied. "If you fear him, you are not as powerful as him," Offerus reasoned. "I want to enter the service of Christ," Offerus exclaimed, and passed by the cross and went on his way. On his way, Offerus met a hermit. He asked the hermit where he could find Christ. "Everywhere," the hermit replied. The hermit knew the type of dull giant he was dealing with, and he knew he would not take to prayer. So he led Offerus to a violent river and said, "The poor people who have crossed this water have drowned. Stay here and carry them on your strong shoulders. If you do this, Christ will recognize you as his servant." And so he did. Offerus spent his days and nights carrying people across the river. One night, overwhelmed with fatigue, Offerus received a knock on his door. It was a child who wanted to cross. Offerus took him on his shoulders and began crossing the river. But as he reached the middle, the river became a furious torrent. The waves swelled and Offerus began to buckle. In fear of letting the child fall, Offerus uprooted a tree to lean on, but the child was becoming heavier and heavier. Offerus began to fear the child would drown. He lifted his head up and asked, "Child, why do you make yourself so heavy? It seems to me that I carry the world." The child replied, "Not only do you carry the world, you carry the one that made the world. I am Christ. As a reward, I baptize you in the name of the Father, in my own name, and in the name of the Holy Spirit. From now on, you will be called Christopher." Christopher walked the earth for the rest of his days to teach the word of Christ. Christopher, the one who bears Christ for the masses. In his focus on Offerus, however, Falconelli reveals a certain key to unlock another layer of meaning in the legend's symbolic expression. In his enigmatic manner, Falconelli writes, "Christopher stands for Chryso, who carries the gold. From then on, we better understand the great importance of the symbol, so eloquent, of St. Christopher. It is the hieroglyph of solar sulfur, Jesus, or the nascent gold, raised on mercurial waves and then carried by the clean energy of this mercury to the degree of power possessed by the elixir." Cryptic indeed, almost impenetrable prose. But let's look at this passage a little closer. Falconelli is stating that in the symbolic legend, Jesus, or Christ, is the nascent gold. Nascent means coming into being. The word's etymological roots stem from the concept of beginning or birth. Nascent gold here, or the solar sulfur, is not just gold, it is gold growing into its full potential. The final section of the excerpt explains why the gold is growing. Because it is being carried on the mercurial waves. The mercurial waves here refer to the metal mercury. Gold is achieving its potential because of the clean energy of mercury. Falconelli explains that mercury's color is an emblematic grey, and that explains why many of the representations of St. Christopher coat him in that color. We will return to the legend of Offerus soon, but first let's look closer at Mercury. Mercury is of the utmost importance when it comes to understanding not only the mechanics behind the old world's technology, but also in understanding our own contemporary time in which we find ourselves traversing the enigmatic landscape of symbols that have shaped our understanding of history and our place in it. The symbol here represents the element hydrogyros. Its literal translation from the Greek means silver water. Hydrogyros has many names. It was also called quicksilver. Today it is referred to as mercury. The alchemical symbol is precisely the same symbol used in classical astrology to represent the so-called planet Mercury. Pure or native mercury is an extremely rare element in the Earth's crust. It's primarily retrieved from cinnabar, a bright scarlet or red pigmented form of mercury sulfide. Cinnabar is the most common source ore for refining mercury. Both Wikipedia and World Atlas tell us that mercury is the 66th most abundant element in Earth's crust. In its pure state, mercury is a silver-like liquid. It is the only metal that is liquid at standard temperature and pressure. It has a freezing point of -38.83 degrees and a boiling point of 356.73 degrees. It is an excellent conductor of electricity. Its uses are primarily electrical based. It has a primary role in fluorescent lighting. Its other uses include thermometers and dental amalgams. Mercury dissolves all metals, including gold and silver, to form amalgams. The only exception is iron. It is also used in vaccines. Governmental, medical, and pharmaceutical industries declared mercury toxic in the early 21st century, gradually phasing out its use in medicine and leading some countries to completely ban the element. In some countries, it is illegal to trade mercury. Before this, mercury was a staple in certain traditional medical treatments, such as the traditional Chinese medicine. And while I do not dispute mercury's potential toxicity when injected into the body, the concerns surrounding its hazardous potential are largely overblown. All metals, especially when injected and taken in excess, are toxic. High iron, copper, zinc, and aluminium levels in the body contribute towards a whole host of disease, arguably more so than mercury. And yet the governments of our world have not banned aluminium foil. They have not stopped fortifying grains with iron oxide, and zinc and copper supplements are available to purchase with ease and without constraint on the value of dosage a person can expose themselves to with such supplements. Could there be other undisclosed reasons for demonizing and restricting mercury? Let's look a little closer at this extraordinary element's electromagnetic potential. Mercury is an electrically conductive liquid, and because of this, it has historically been applied to create light switches, electrodes in some batteries. As a gas, to create fluorescent lighting, and, most interestingly, it was used, we are told, in lighthouses. According to the mainstream historical narrative, lighthouse keepers were responsible for keeping the massive lens at the top of the lighthouse spinning all day, every day. A spinning lens turning at a set speed made the light flash. They usually achieve this by setting the lens on wheels or bearings attached to clockworks that the keeper would periodically wind. In the late 19th century, some keepers, sick to death with having to keep winding the clockwork, began floating their lenses in liquid mercury. The lens's metal base spun more easily in the mercury, which helped the light rotate faster with less frequent winding. It is a practice still in use in some lighthouses today. It is evident from its structure that the lighthouse's sole function was not just to light the way for ships. It was either one of its functions among many others, or just an inherited act of repurposement. Many lighthouses are constructed in the familiar octagonal structure. Many have the red and white stripes, indicative of power stations. Many still have their antennas, and they were situated right next to the water. It is obvious that they had a similar role as many of the old world's power stations we find repurposed and rebranded all across our realm. Lindau Lighthouse in Germany is a fascinating example. We see all the familiar dentils and holes, suggestive of vibration and frequency manipulation. We see the octagonal cupola. They have replaced the original antenna with New World junk, and oddly the structure has a clock. And although those of the old world made the most advanced clocks ever seen, the presence of a clock face here appears superfluous. Perhaps the abundance of clock faces we see on so many of the old world structures and towers are actually repurposed steam gauges that used to be present to measure the pressure of the energetic water. The intricate and complex design of these lighthouses would have been a feat of engineering for those of the 19th century and their predecessors, unless those that came before the 19th century were technologically advanced, which of course they were. Mercury's role in lens rotation is a subtle example of repurposement. It is very likely that the complex apparatus at the top of these lighthouses were modified as illuminated lenses during the Great Reset, and what existed before operated to extract ethereal energy. For most of the 19th century, gas and oil burners were used as sources of light in these structures. And yet look at the size of some of these lenses. Look at the complexity of the designs. All to house light running on gas and oil? I don't think so. The history of the lighthouse is of utmost importance because it, 1, provides evidence of Mercury being present in some kind of apparatus directly located in a cupola, the very spot we see emptied on so many structures today. And 2, because Mercury's presence here was to enable the lenses to spin and rotate more easily. And that's very interesting, because look what happens when you apply magnetism and electricity to Mercury. It rotates and creates a vortex, either clockwise or anti-clockwise, depending on the application of the current. A vortex, as you know, is an integral expression of a toroidal field. There are three main types of vortexes: electrical, magnetic, and electromagnetic. In addition to Mercury's electromagnetic potential and its susceptibility to form a vortex when under the influence of current, the silver water also has another unrecognized application. Look. No wonder Mercury is demonized and illegal. As you can see, Mercury is able to provide even a homemade television antenna with the ability to convert radio frequency alternating currents to extract a television signal. Antennas can be designed to transmit and receive electromagnetic waves in all directions equally. And you could hypothesize that the orbs on the old world's antennas contained mercury. But again, it is no secret that mercury amalgamates with gold and other metals. An amalgam is an alloy of mercury and another metal. Mercury strongly amalgamates with gold, copper, silver, and many other metals. The only common exception is iron. The orbs could not have contained mercury because, as you saw, mercury would have scavenged the gold, silver, and copper and amalgamated with the metals. We do not see any evidence of that here. They function strictly as aerial antennas. But if all of these structures contain some type of engine or apparatus, similar to the Fresnel lenses we see in lighthouses, with mercury continually forming a vortex, then we would have a setup that enabled the antennas to extract ethereal energy and transmit strong electromagnetic signals. Just as Falconelli reveals in his reading of St. Christopher, it was the mercury that enabled the gold to achieve its potential. It is highly likely that the absent cylinders, vessels, and containers that were removed from these structures, and which were usually present within the octagonal geometric structures, contained mercury. And it raises the question, if some lighthouses are still running their lenses off of mercury today, wouldn't they still extract ethereal energy? No, they would not. And once again, Falconelli tells us why. As Falconelli states elsewhere in The Mystery of the Cathedrals, the dissolution of sulfur, or in other words, its absorption by mercury, provided the pretext for very different emblems, but the resulting body, homogeneous and perfectly prepared, retains the name philosophical Mercury. It is the first-class matter or compound, which requires only a gradual cooking process to transform itself first into red sulfur, then into elixir, and then, in the third time, into the universal medicine. As Falconelli makes clear, transforming pure mercury into a red, sulfurous state is the first step. And as mentioned previously, cinnabar or mercury sulfide is red. And as we see here on representations of St. Christopher's robes, he wears one half grey to indicate mercury and another half red, which is indicative of the red sulfur. It is the transformed state of mercury that allows the gold, here represented as Christ, to achieve its full potential, or, to keep it consistent with the legend, to reach the masses. What Falconelli is actually telling us is that in able to distribute this clean electromagnetic energy via golden orbed finials or antennas, a special kind of mercury had to be present. This is what was contained within the vessels and engines. And it is likely that it was this unique mercury that enabled the extraction of the ethereal energy from above in the first place. Perhaps it is just a coincidence, if you believe in such a thing, but it is interesting that many of the smaller vessel-like relics we see have markings inside the containers that are red, perhaps a homage to the substance they once contained. Now I know what you want to say. Come on, you are turning a molehill into a mountain.